Alright, yeah, and welcome back to some more Magic Duels. This week we're going to be looking at Dmitry Petkov's Jund Reanimator list. So this is quite a special little list. Mostly because it's a Reanimator deck that contains all of the cards in their colours. So we're not playing any out of colour stuff like our Angels and stuff like that. And also it's got quite the focus on maintaining your life total as well. So it has that kind of longevity that most Reanimator decks kind of are a little bit hit and miss. So we can go for the long game because we've got a lot of ways of gaining and preserving our life, like Fog, for example. So what is Reanimator? Essentially, Reanimator is a deck that focuses on getting big creatures into your graveyard, things like your Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hungers. Get them into your graveyard, and then on turn 5 or 6, we want to return them from our graveyard to the battlefield. So essentially, we're cheating on mana, getting out some really big creatures out very soon and making a lot of mess for our opponent. So let's start at the beginning of the deck, shall we? We've got Sinister Concoction. So for 1 black enchantment, you get to pay a black, pay 1 life, and put the top card of your library into your graveyard, and discard a card and sacrifice it. Lots of things to do there, but a fair few of those are quite useful to us. The put a top card of your library into your graveyard's a bit hit and miss, but if that hits a creature, then you've done well. It also has a discard outlet as well, so if we have a big creature in our hand that we want to get rid of, then we can discard it. And sacrificing the Sinister Concoction is mostly for Delirium decks, so we won't really get much use out of it, but it's essentially so that we can't reuse it. And finally, once we've done all of those payments, we get to destroy a creature, so it's essentially a 2-mana hard-casted removal spell that forces you to discard, but the discard most of the time isn't really a cost for us, it's kind of a benefit. So we've got 2 copies of that for that kind of situation. We then have Lightning Axe. This is another kind of removal spell that we can benefit from its disadvantage. So for 1 red, instant speed, as an additional cost to cast Lightning Axe, you may discard a card or pay 5. So yet again, if we've got a big creature in our hand, we don't really want to be hard casting them. Though it's not out of the question in this deck, because we do have a fair bit of ramp, and everything is in colour, so we can actually cast every single creature in our deck. What we really want to be doing, though, is discarding them. So on turn 1, we could be discarding our Ulamog, and getting 5 damage on a creature that might be a Sylvan Advocate or a Kalatas, that kind of thing. Lots of stuff to target with Lightning Axe, kills pretty much everything in the format. We then have Fog. Fog's here just to preserve our life total, because by the time Reanimator usually gets up and running, if we're against more aggressive decks, we're probably quite low on life. So, turn 6, for example, we play our 5-mana Necromantic Summons. We want to be able to hold up a Fog as well, to get past that little bit of summoning sickness that our massive creature has to deal with, and we can just hold up Fog to prevent all the combat damage that will be dealt. So it's really good for that sort of stuff. It helps us stabilize, and yeah, it's pretty cool. We then have Cathartic Reunion. This is another way to discard a lot of creatures and useless cards out of our deck, or out of our hand more specifically. So for 1 and a red, sorcery speed, as an additional cost to cast Cathartic Reunion, discard 2 cards. So you got to be careful with this, because if you're against a control matchup, usually this is bad anyway. We're actually using it for the discard outlet most of all. But if your opponent uses a counter spell on Cathartic Reunion, you don't get to discard 3. You don't get to draw 3 cards, but you still have to discard the 2. So it's a major drop-in card advantage if you can't draw those 3 cards. So you've got to be really wary about that. But for the most part, it's kind of an uncounterable discard outlet for us. So we can get our Ulamog and our Gear Hulks and stuff like that discarded with the Cathartic Reunion, and just the drawing 3 cards is a bit of an upside for us, so that's why we're running it. 4 copies of that as well. We then have Pulse of Marasa, so this is one way that we gain life. It's also one way we pull creatures back from our graveyard. So for 2 and a green, instant speed, return target creature or land from a graveyard to its owner's hand. You gain 6 life. So this allows us to maybe grab a land so that we can keep hitting our land drops for the turn. Gaining 6 life is great against any kind of aggro strategies as well, which is usually a bad matchup for us when we're playing Reanimator, because we're quite a slow deck that doesn't really have many creatures. So even when we get our creature out on turn 5, we don't have enough blockers to deal with their aggressive board states. So having all of this life gain is pretty sweet as well. And we also, returning creatures from the graveyard to our hand is not actually a bad thing in this deck, because as I mentioned before, we do have a lot of ramp in Explosive Vegetations and Nissa's Renewals and stuff like that. So it's not out of the question that we just simply pull a creature out of our graveyard and hardcast it. So to have Pulse of Marasas, 3 copies here, is really good for that. We then have Radiant Flames, so the only way this deck is going to survive is through its board wipes in the early game. If it's against aggro, of course. If we're against a mirror match, then this is pretty much just a useless card. But Radiant Flames says 2 and a red, sorcery speed. It has Converge, which means that for every single colour you pay, then X is greater. So Radiant Flames deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of colours spent to cast Radiant Flames. So this can be from anything from dealing 1 to each creature up to 3. We can choose how many colours we use as long as we have the colour variety anyway to spend that mana. So we really want to be doing this for 3, and since we're a 3 colour deck, it's not really too difficult either. So this is a really good board wipe for the current meta. Moving on, we've got another board wipe, Languish. 2 and a black, sorcery speed. All creatures get -4/-4 until the end of the turn. So yeah, again, it's another board wipe, this time in black. We do really use a lot of black in this deck as well, so hitting that double black is not too difficult for us, because we should really be trying to hit it anyway by turn 6. So Languish is really good for essentially any kind of situation other than bigger creatures like your Ulamogs and things like that. But it essentially hits all the creatures in the format. It gets past Indestructible as well. If there is an Indestructible creature with 4 toughness, then you can take it out that way because it'll have 0 toughness and therefore it has to die. So it's really cool for that kind of stuff. We then have Bitter Revelation. So for 3 and a black sorcery speed, look at the top 4 cards of your library, put 2 of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. You lose 2 life. So this is a 4 mana draw 4, keep 2 kind of card, and it comes with a bit of a discard outlet in that sense as well. So for Bitter Revelation, our ideal kind of draw is to hit a land and a Reanimator spell, and the other 2 to be creatures we want to reanimate, so that they get discarded into our graveyard. We do lose 2 life, but as I mentioned, we do have a lot of life gain, so that's not going to be too difficult for us to manage, really. But it's really here for the card draw and the discard outlet. Unfortunately, we can't discard from our hand, it's only from the 4 cards that we look at. So, it's not always too useful, but it's pretty good nonetheless. Next we have Explosive Vegetation. So for 3 and a green, sorcery speed, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. So this is our ramp. This is for essentially when we're done with trying to reanimate cards and we just want to hardcast them. So we can get our Ulamogs out really quickly by Explosive Vegetation into Nissa's Renewal, straight into Ulamog, that kind of thing. There's a pretty nice combo chain there. Explosive Vegetation also hits Landfall triggers as well with our Omnath. This is one card that I added in personally myself because I figured it's pretty good for this kind of deck. I really do like Omnath in Reanimator decks. And it has Landfall, so we get some elemental tokens. We can use our Explosive Vegetation to essentially put 10 power on the board with Omnath, as long as he sticks around, which is pretty sweet. We then have Necromantic Summon, so this is the card for the deck. The only reason why it works is for cards like this. So for 4 and a black, put target creature from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So absolutely any creature card from anybody's graveyard. So if our opponents just discarded their own Ulamog because they don't think they'll need it, turn 5 we can go and grab it and kill them with it. So it really punishes our opponent for putting cards into their graveyards that they don't want used against them. It also has Spell Mastery as well that says if there's 2 or more instants and sorceries in your graveyard, that creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1, 2+1/+1 counters on it. Spell Mastery is really easy to get in this deck because we'll be doing a lot of Cathartic Reunioning and we'll be doing a lot of discards. So Cathartic Reunion gets 1 instant and sorcery in your graveyard right from the get-go, and you'll probably be discarding a instant and sorcery along the way, at least a hand size, or maybe even just wiping the board once or twice before we end up reanimating. So Spell Mastery, more times than it's not, is actually enabled from this card. So every single creature that we play, just consider it with an extra +1/+1 counter on it for the most part. such as Noxious Gearhulk. So this is one of the newer Kaladesh Reanimator cards. So this is 6 mana removal spell essentially that comes with a 5/4 body. So for 4 and 2 black, artifact creature construct 5/4 with menace. When Noxious Gearhulk enters the battlefield, you may destroy another target creature. If a creature is destroyed this way, you gain life equal to its toughness. So if your opponent just put out a big fatty like a Verdurous Gearhulk, for example, put all of its counters on it, made it an 8/8, we can reanimate Noxious Gearhulk, gain 8 life, and we've got a 5/4 menace out on the battlefield, which is pretty awesome. Menace, essentially, for those who don't know, means that it needs 2 creatures in order to block it as well. So if your opponent only has 1 creature, you can consider this unblockable, which is really hard for your opponent to deal with. And also, if he double blocks, then we get to choose the order of which we block. So we get the profitable block if we are willing to trade with one of his creatures, essentially. We then have Combustible Gearhulk. So for 4 and a red, a 6/6 first striking artifact creature. When Combustible Gearhulk enters the battlefield, target opponent may have you draw 3 cards. If the player doesn't, put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard, then Combustible Gearhulk deals damage to that player equal to the total converted mana cost of those cards. So essentially, your opponent has you either draw 3 cards or mill 3 cards, and they lose that much life. So either one of these is actually a win-win for us. The drawing 3 cards speaks for itself. We get card advantage, and we probably get loads of Reanimator spells that we can pull back our creatures with. If we mill 3 cards, we just pretty much have the potential to kill our opponent. If we hit Ulamog, Nissa's Revelation, and Omnath, that's pretty much the game right there. That's 17. We can actually reasonably kill our opponent instantly with a Combustible Gearhulk if they don't let us draw cards. So it's really awesome for that. And if they get rid of it and we reanimate it again, we get to do that whole cycle again. Obviously the mill can hit 3 lands, and in which case it won't do any damage, but that's it's not out of the question, but it's, you know, it's a bit hit or miss sometimes, but it's a lot of fun to play around with cards that are a little bit RNG in that sense. Makes for more fun and entertaining games in the long run, in my opinion, anyway. But Combustible Gearhulk, potential to instantly kill just by itself. Otherwise, severe card advantage and extra targets for our Reanimator spells. Green Warden of Marasa. So for 4 and 2 green, we have a 5/4 creature. Whenever Green Warden of Marasa enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand, which is any card whatsoever. So if we can hardcast one of our creatures, then we can bring it back. There's also the little combo I like to bring up all the time. Pulse of Marasa and Green Warden. So Green Warden pulls back Pulse of Marasa. If Green Warden ever dies, you don't exile it. Instead, you Pulse of Marasa Green Warden back. When Green Warden enters the battlefield, you grab Pulse of Marasa. So every time Green Warden dies, you gain 6 life. Is pretty much how it goes for essentially just by recasting it over and over. Excuse me, over and over again. It also does have the secondary ability though. When it does die, you may exile it, and if you do, then you get to do the first ability again. But you don't ever get to have Green Warden back again, so you've got to have be either in a really desperate situation to want to use this secondary ability, or really need the card that is in your graveyard at the time. So it's something to consider, but for the most part, we even want to be reanimating Green Warden as well. If Green Warden enters the graveyard from anywhere, we can reanimate it, and the moment it hits the battlefield, we can just grab our Necromantic Summons back. So it is a free reanimator target, which is pretty sweet. We then have Ever After, yet again another bit of a reanimator card, but this is the better one, arguably, of course. For 4 and 2 black, sorcery speed, return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Each of those creatures is a black zombie, in addition to its other colours and types. Put Ever After at the bottom of its owner's library. So this essentially guarantees that we have infinite reanimator spells in our deck, so long as we don't self-mill them. As long as we're casting them or they're not being countered, they will keep cycling back into our deck, so we can keep reanimating cards over and over again. They do get put to the bottom of our library, but we have a lot of ways to shuffle cards, shuffle our deck with our Explosive Vegetation, with our Evolving Wild, stuff like that, so it won't be at the bottom of the deck for very long, so long as it's not very late in the game anyway. But that's 2 targets that you get to pick, so we can get an Ulamog and an Omnath back at the same time, which is awesome. We then have Nissa's Renewal, another bit of ramp, another bit of life gain. So for 5 and a green, sorcery speed, search your library for up to 3 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle your library. You gain 7 life. Against aggro decks, that 7 life is really brutal. For us, though, it's going from 6 to 9 lands in that turn, and then next turn playing your land drop and hitting your Ulamog. So if you're casting Nissa's Renewal, you're probably casting Ulamog pretty quickly after that as well. Certainly have the mana. This is one of the ways, though, that we can feasibly cast our creatures that are in our deck. They're all very expensive, so we really need a lot of lands to do it. Nissa's Renewal is our way of getting to that kind of land count. This is pretty sweet. Only one of, though, because it is very expensive. We do have a lot of very expensive cards, though, so it is a bit of a worry for our curve to have too many expensive things. Next, we have Gaia's Revenge. This is Control's worst nightmare. So for 5 and 2 green, we have an 8/5 with haste that cannot be countered. That's one part of the reason why it's a Control nightmare. The second part, however, is that Gaia's Revenge cannot be the target of non-green spells or abilities from non-green sources. So the only way to get rid of this card is through combat damage or through fight mechanics in green, and Control decks will not be using fight mechanics. So you can consider this guy very much so on the board for the rest of the game. He's also got 5 toughness, so he survives a languish as well. Planar Outburst is probably the only card that's going to get rid of him outside of combat damage. Just straight up board wipes that are just like hard casted. Those are the ones that are really going to get rid of Gaia's Revenge. But there's no hard casted removal, nothing like murders, nothing like languishes that can really get rid of Gaia's Revenge. So once he's down, he's usually down for good, which is pretty sweet as long as you're smart about how you attack as well. Which makes him Super Friend's Nightmare as well, because they like to have 1 or 2 little creatures and just counter and block the rest. And Gaia's Revenge hastes in, kills everything. It's pretty sweet. We have 2 copies of that for that reason. We then have Plated Crusher. This is kind of the equivalent without the haste, and it also comes with Trample. So for 4 and 3 green, we have a creature 7/6 with Trample and Hexproof. Speaks for itself, but once it's down, it's staying down, short of hard casted removal. Yet again, it's out of languish range, so the only thing that's really going to get rid of it is Planar Outburst. Yet even worse for our opponent is the Hexproof as well. So even if they did have fight cards, they still couldn't target Plated Crusher. And Plated Crusher could also come down with an extra +1/+2/+1/+1 counters thanks to Necromantic Summons. So it can be really big, and the Trample just pushes through your opponent. There's no chump blocking this guy, so it's pretty sweet. Next we have Omnath. We've spoken about him briefly. This is the one card that I've actually added into the deck myself because it kind of seemed like it fit really nicely here. So it's a 5/5 legendary creature for 3, 2 red and 2 green. It has Landfall, which essentially means whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get to put a 5/5 red and green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. So you essentially, for all intensive purposes, get to put a copy of Omnath onto the battlefield. He just doesn't have all the special abilities. When Omnath dies, or another elemental, which includes your 5/5 tokens that you've been making, whenever any of those die, Omnath deals 3 damage to target creature or player, so it's a lightning bolt every single time they get rid of one of your cards. So the reason why I think he's really good in this deck is because we're actually running quite a lot of ramp. We're going to be making a lot of land drops. We also have a lot of Evolving Wilds as well. So Evolving Wilds triggers it once, and the sack for a basic will trigger it again. So the turn Omnath comes out, you can get 2 5/5 red 5 tokens. 5/5 tokens, yes. Sorry, I'm tripping over my words today. But we also have a lot of ramp cards as well. So Nissa's Renewal is 3 basic lands. That's going to get us 3 5/5s. And there's Explosive Vegetation that's going to get us 2 5/5s. So it's really awesome for that kind of thing. You can really explosively go wide with Omnath, which is why I think he's perfect for this deck. Next we have Nissa's Revelation. Yet again, another bit of card advantage, another bit of life gain. So for 5 and 2 green, sorcery speed, it's very expensive, but it has quite the payoff. We get to scry 5, which essentially means we get to go find whatever we want. It's almost a tutor if you go that deep. And then you get to reveal the top card of your library. If it is a creature card, like an Ulamog. We're going to use Ulamog as an example because it's quite brutal. It's happened with this deck in my playtesting quite a lot as well. So let's consider Ulamog as the target for if it's a creature. You draw cards equal to its power, so you draw 10 cards. You gain life equal to its toughness, you gain 10 life. So for 7 mana, you get to draw 10, gain 10 life, which is awesome. That's just kind of game over for your opponent at that point, as long as you've kind of stabilized. So it's pretty sweet. And then you can discard to hand size, discard every single creature you got, and you can almost guarantee you've just drawn into a lot of reanimate spells, so you can reanimate them the turn after. It just gets bonkers. Speaking of good old Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, we've got Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger. So for 10 mana, we've got a 10/10 legendary creature. Whenever you cast Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, exile 2 permanents. So that could be lands, it could be planeswalkers, it could be creatures, it could be vehicles, anything you want, you can exile. So he's really good for that kind of thing. Super Friends can suck my ass with Ulamog because he'll come in and take out 2 of your planeswalkers right out the gate, and then probably come in and swing and kill another. He also has Indestructible, which makes him an absolute nightmare to remove. He only gets removed through sacrifice and exile, so as long as you can get around that sort of stuff. Anguished Unmaking's really bad for Ulamog, so if they're in black and white colours, then you got to keep your eye out for that. It's kind of a blowout if you get Anguished Unmaking on your Ulamog, but yeah, whenever he attacks, defending player exiles the top 20 cards of his or her library. So usually there's about 2 or 3 turns for Ulamog to be out before your opponent just loses. No matter how many times they're chump blocking, there's no way that they can get through 3 attacks with Ulamog. Because 20 cards off the top of your library is kind of really, really disturbing. And it gets rid of your opponent's Anguished Unmakings and stuff like that. So if you'd managed to hit both of them, if you're lucky enough to do that, then your opponent has no outs and they can just concede right then and there. Of course, if you're against aggro decks, then you probably have to hold back with this card, but if you do get those attacks in, you can guarantee you're probably going to be winning very soon. So Ulamog is absolutely awesome. He's the optimal creature to get into your graveyard and the optimal creature to reanimate. So that's essentially the deck. Let's go on to the mana base. We've got 4 swamps, 3 mountains, and 5 forests. 5 forests mostly because we have a lot of double and triple greens and also a lot of ramp cards that need green. 4 swamps over the mountains because yet again we have a lot of double blacks. We want to be hitting black by turn 5. We want to be on double black by turn 4 realistically for languishes and stuff like that, so we're running more than that. And 3 mountains because we only really need a mountain right at the very beginning of the game. The only thing that's double really is Omnath, so yeah, you don't really want so many mountains, but we have a lot of duels that are going to be able to counter this imbalance that we've got here. Speaking of, we've got Hissing Quagmire. So this is a green and a black land that enters the battlefield tapped, and you can also pay 1, a black and a green. Hissing Quagmire becomes a 2/2 black and green elemental creature token with Death Touch until the end of the turn, and it's still a land. So destroy target non-land creature, for example, still doesn't target this even when it becomes a creature. And the 2/2 Death Touch is just a brilliant way to stop your opponent from attacking him. If your opponent's playing 1/1 tokens as well, you can start eating them. But if they're attacking in with their own Gaia's Revenge, for example, then this 2/2 is just going to be able to stop them right in the tracks by threatening to kill it with Death Touch. So it's really awesome. And if your opponent's wiped your board as well, having man lands around is pretty sweet to just continue pinging your opponent to get that last little bit of damage in. We then have Smouldering Marsh, so this is a swamp mountain. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. So this is a check land. So you need a swamp or a mountain essentially, and we've got a lot of basics that do that. We then have Woodland Cemetery. So Woodland Cemetery enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a single swamp or a forest. Swamp is also included in Smouldering Marsh, so if Smouldering Marsh is on the battlefield, then we can have our Woodland Cemeteries enter the battlefield untapped, which is pretty sweet. So we have dual lands that make our dual lands come into play untapped. We then have the same, but in red and black, enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a swamp or a mountain. And finally we have our Evolving Wilds, so this allows us to filter out our deck, make sure we draw into less lands, more Reanimator, and stuff like that. We can also pull it back with Pulse and Marassa to thin out our deck. And also, as I mentioned earlier, it's double triggers for Omnath if you've still got basics in your deck. That's going to be the deck tech anyway, guys. So if you did enjoy the look of the deck, then be sure to watch the matches that should be following shortly after this, if not already. Be sure to leave a like, it helps me out a great deal, lets me know you're still enjoying the series. If you haven't already subscribed, then be sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you are a subscriber, then if you'd hit that bell that's right next to the subscribe button, it'll notify you when I release a video and make sure that we all are happy. And as always, if you aren't subscribed and you're not quite sure, then stay for the end card, see the rest of the content I got to offer, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.